15 minutes of the presentation, followed by 5-minute question answer. So Clara, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I try to be a very strict timekeeper, so I shall do my absolute best to stick to the time.
Thank you. Once again.
I am going to try to go through some of my... Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'm going to try and go through some of my suggestions, some of my ideas of the things that might help when you're thinking about practical preparation for youth participation. Now, maybe many of you don't know who I am. And the first question you might say, well, why are you doing a keynote? What experience do you have, Claire, working with youth? That is an excellent question. That is a really good question. And so what I'm going to do is very quickly, I'm going to give you some of the projects that I've worked in before I actually go into some of the suggestions that I have that I've learned from doing these projects. And all of these projects are relevant to the talk today. So the first one that I would give was one that we designed a couple of years ago. It's called The Structure of Stuff is Sweet. And the idea was we actually conveyed the science of crystallography using marshmallows, sweets, and cocktail sticks. Now, this was something that was actually delivered to 40,000 people all over the UK, and now it's gone global around the world. Loads of crystallographers all over the world are sharing this with different schools, and we had a lot of youth involved in doing that. Another example of work I've done is actually working on something called Project M. Oh, change slide, please. There we go. So Project M was a citizen science chemistry project. It was my first citizen science project for over 1,000 secondary school students. So they were actually involved in real science, making real samples that had never been made before and sending them to us. And when we then characterize the samples at a particle accelerator, which is quite cool in itself. And then we're able to actually send the students back information so they could do some analysis. Now, I appreciate, the time means I'm being very short and efficient here. I could spend 3 hours just talking about this project alone, but I'm just trying to convey some of the practical experience that I have to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Another project that I think is useful here is also the board game. So I have the honor and kind of a strange pleasure of being able to say that I helped to design a board game. And again, all of these projects are very much collaborative projects. So I worked with Mark and Matt to do this. But the thing that was really cool was we started out with a hard copy board game. So it was first designed and then tested and played by over 200 students. But it will soon actually go into over 100 schools 100 schools all over the UK, because we were given a grant from STFC in the UK. And this is great. This was loads of fun. We got loads of great feedback when we were doing it from the youth. But one of the things we realized was obviously during a pandemic, there are a lot of youth stuck at home and they are with their families. Maybe we could convert our board game into a print and play version for everyone to download for free. So we did. We made the game available online, and we've had over 12,000 people all around the world download the game, which again blows my mind. It's so awesome. But I think the important thing to say is that, in doing all of these things, you learn, and you learn all the time about what works and what doesn't work. Now, the major project that I'm working on at the moment is kind of really building on an awful lot of these things that I've learned. So it's called Seeds, and the idea is it's science by teenagers for teenagers. So I might say teenagers quite a lot. I mean youth in general, but I'm using the word teenagers a lot at the moment. Our project is a Horizon project running in Spain, the UK, Greece, and the Netherlands, and we are empowering teenagers to explore changes for a healthy lifestyle. Now, the idea is that the teenagers explore the change themselves. They are the ones who are driving the science, and they are driving the experiments. So this is obviously really relevant to the conversation that we're having today. We're available on Twitter if you want to follow us, and our website is there, but it's also under construction, so it will be up and live very, very soon. But thinking about the stages of the Makeathon, this is something that I think is quite helpful to think about, because you have 3 different stages, and at each of these stages, teenagers are involved. So we have focus groups where we question and discuss things. We have make-a-thons where the teenagers create, test, and explore different ideas. And then we have interventions where, again, the teenagers practice the intervention they've designed. They solve a problem that they have, they analyze things, and they make change. Now, all of this is going to now be distilled into the idea of what should you consider, which is directly building on the topic today. What should you consider when you're trying to design a citizen science project for youth, or a citizen social science project for youth? The number one thing that I want to convey, and I could literally just leave this slide here and walk away because I think it's the most important thing I would like you to think about. It's power. Because we forget, many of us, it's been a long time since we were in secondary school, youth have been programmed to defer to adults. And the very principles of citizen science really try to break those traditional structures of power. And so when we come and approach the idea of creating a project, we should be doing this equitably. We should actually be thinking about how we can make our approach more equitable to the youth so that we can better engage them in the science and we can make them feel empowered, and not even make them feel, we can actually empower them. So seeds is obviously one of the number one things that has been kind of really making me think about this, because we have a situation where, you know, we're trying to create an environment where the youth feel empowered. So we have to think about how many adults are in the room, for example. And how are those adults interacting with the teenagers? Because adults can like defer to or return to their sort of traditional roles where they give instructions and they give orders. And that is never going to work. For the fundamentals of extreme citizen science, for the fundamental of youth science, that is never going to work if you just sit there and lecture at the youth. You have failed. So I would really like you to think about that. If that's the one takeaway you take away, please take that. One of the ways we're trying to address that in seeds is we're using a mantra for ambassadors, and we really try to emphasize they have experience, you have so much knowledge. You are therefore the best people to solve this problem. And these are the things that we keep reminding ourselves and reminding them. But just building a bit more on power, the other thing I'd like you to think about is that language is power. And you have 2 options when it comes to this. You can condense your X years of experience or education into 20 minutes, bombard these poor students and teenagers and youth with all these words that you are super familiar with and, you know, feel really know well. Or you can take a step back and say, actually, like, how much of this jargon, how much of these words are really necessary? What is the key messages that I want to get across? Really try to work from what they know and build on it, and really reflect on what is essential. And a very simple example I have for this is the idea that I mentioned the word intervention earlier on, right? What we noticed very quickly already after doing the focus groups is teenagers don't know what an intervention is. It doesn't make sense. They're confused. We have to spend a lot of time explaining that to them. So in a sense, we've already failed there because they don't understand what's going on. So what we decided is, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's get rid of the word invention. Let's use experiment, because that's language they use most of the time. Most of them are doing science degrees, or not degrees, science classes. So they know what the word is. They use it quite often. And so that's a more powerful way of engaging with them, that they understand where we're coming from. Another thing I'd like you to consider is, at the end of the project, what do you want the youth to change? What's the difference you want to make in their lives, or what's the difference you want them to make? And then take a step back again and say, okay, well, how does change happen? Going back to the language thing, if you tell somebody something, if you lecture at somebody, is that going to create a change? Or if the change comes from within, if someone feels empowered to be involved with the change, are they more likely to make a sustainable change? I mean, I think we all know the answer there. We all know that if you're empowered, you're going to make sustainable change. But the gap between the steps that you have to take to make that happen and that happening is quite big. And actually, you have to really understand and think about what you're doing. Another thing that I'd like you to think about is to focus. So to focus your ideas down very quickly. And that really involves you getting the youth on board from the very, very start. Do not waste your time and their time creating the perfect thing that is absolutely useless for them. I cannot tell you how many times this has happened. People spend ages, years even, creating something they think is super beautiful, and then in situ, it just doesn't work. So this is where the idea of fail fast and adapt quickly early on is really important. And this was really obvious in the board game, because we designed a board game, we designed a version of the game, we did it in paper. So rather than like create a beautiful version of the game, we said, okay, let's start from paper. And then what that meant is we were able to kind of scratch things out with pens, or, you know, write new cards on the fly. We were able to like really adapt in situ. And then we took this paper version to a school and were able to get feedback from them in situ. And all of these early decisions are really, really good, because it stops you getting to a place where you've spent a lot of time and a lot of money creating something beautiful that is then totally useless. And this could be applied across the board. It doesn't just apply to like citizen science or to board games. It applies to like any content you might create or workshops that you run. A side note here as well, always talk to teachers and guardians, but just keep it in the back of your mind that they're not the target audience. So they're incredibly, you know, they have so much knowledge to share. They have so many ideas, so much experience, and that's really important to take on board early. We did lots of talking with teachers in both Project M and in the game, and are talking to teachers in Seeds at the moment. And it's really helping us make a better project. So it's something I would really recommend. Openness. So this is something that I think is super, super important. You need to be open to what motivates and interests the youth. And you need to be able to respond to that in your idea. So in the project idea that you have. Be open to incorporating their ideas and to maybe changing some of the direction of your project if needs be. You should also be open to learning from them. From every single project I have done, I have learned so much from these incredible young scientists, and the youth have so much to share and so much for us to be excited about, but we need to be open, and that's really, really important. And another thing that I think I really wanted to highlight as well is that you should also be open to removing barriers. Now, this could be, for example, if you're thinking about underserved communities, removing barriers for them to actually engaging in citizen science and citizen social science. Or it could also be things like thinking about how you design your website, or you design your app, or you design your product. Because actually, say in the case of the game, we designed our game so that it was compatible for people who were colorblind and who also had a low level of visual impairment. We also tested the game with people who were deaf to make sure that the game actually worked for them. And that, A, made our design better, but B, made our game more open to people. And I'm really excited to see that there's going to be a session here on inclusiveness with deaf and hard of hearing people. That's really awesome to see in this space. The final thing that I wanted to suggest is actually to do with the resources. There is very, very little that you can assume will be a standard. Do not assume anything. So this is kind of going back to the talking to teachers, talking to guardians, talking to the youth. If you think about, for example, language, as a scientist, I would use the words in labs. I used to use milliliters. That was kind of the standard unit all the time. Actually, in schools, deciliters is what they use. So if I had sent out instructions with milliliters on everything, that would have been so much confusion and wasted time. Thinking about standards again, in labs and well, not in labs, in like universities, you assume a PowerPoint presentation is a minimum that you can give. You assume it's a default. That is not the case in schools. It's actually really, really dependent on the school. So this is something we have to think about in Seeds, because we're designing, different ways of conveying the core information, of running our events, our makeathons. We cannot rely on PowerPoints. It's nice if we can have them, but it's something we need to be prepared for. So you really need to try and prepare for success in every way possible. I'm going to stop there, hopefully on time. I really tried, and I'm really happy to answer any questions here in the chat, or for you to contact me directly. That's my email address, Twitter, very easy to find. I meant to include at the very start, and I didn't, so I apologize. I'll do that now. I just wanted to describe myself. So I'm Claire. I've got brown hair and I'm wearing big headphones. I also have, I'm going to come close, glasses that make me look like an owl, which I really love, and a very kind of dark purple top and a very colourful background that is actually the crystal structure of hemoglobin, or rather the electron density map of hemoglobin. So I will stop there, and I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. I think, Clara, as you mentioned already, so yeah, I'm just putting like 10 seconds, so it's excellent. Thank you very much for that, for keeping the time and not stealing other times. That's super. Actually, there are nice comments coming in and also questions, so I'll try my best to read them out to you. And also, we try to keep it in 5 minutes. So in case we are not managing to answer all of the questions, it would be really nice if you answer them in the chat. So also, just a nice comment came in also about the gaming in general, which is an important and interesting way of engaging the youth or getting youth involved. That was a comment in the chat. But the first question came from Caroline. So the question is, how do you reach the young people and motivate them to participate? Can you come up with an answer here?
That is, I think, a question rather that I think hundreds of people could give opinions on, but I'm not sure any of us would be really giving the right answer, because I think it depends so much on the local environment. So in the last webinar, for example, there were some really interesting examples of how a charity in Nottingham called Ignite actually reached skateboarding groups and also Romanian gypsy groups, and they directly connected, Czech gypsy groups, sorry, excuse me, and they directly connected with them. And a lot of that was actually because the youth saw the science charities and reached out to them. They were intrigued and connected with them. So I think this goes back to being open to, you know, different approaches from different people, but also recognizing that you might need to go to non-traditional routes to actually reach your target group. So you might need to work more closely with community groups. You might need to reach in directly into teachers, into science networks. It's not easy, but there's lots of ways you can try to do this.
Yes, and I think you can introduce more answers to this question, but thank you for keeping it very short and precise. Another question was in respect to age range. So Esther was also asking, what is the age range of the youth that you are addressing to?
Good question. It varies for each of the projects, but in seeds, it's going to be more of the 12 to 15-year-old age group are more involved there, simply because there's more, the grant was written to try to connect to the early stage group so that you could actually influence them, to encourage them to continue with science.